Welcome to Southern California, the Mecca of electric unicycles. If you hate beautiful, epic views, then this video isn't for you, because there's no shortage of those. I went on the Southern California EUC Tour, and let me just say, if you are an EUC rider, you absolutely need to come here to ride. This is without a doubt the best place to ride an electric unicycle, and that is a hill worth dying on. There's not a little bit of everything to ride here. There's a ton of it. Not just this, but this. Monstrous mountains, deep valleys, Beverly Hills, crowded cities. There's a lot of everything for everyone here, no matter what your flavor of riding. If you don't feel like listening to the melodious sound of my voice, just turn that sound down and enjoy the views. You don't want to miss this adventure. Angeles Crest was the first ride of the tour for me, as I didn't make it to the first day, which was a long beach ride. This one took us to Angeles Crest. At the highest point of this ride, it was at 7,000 feet elevation. It was about 92 miles, and going at Marty speed, which is leisurely and a bit slow. Most of the ride was about 21 to 25 miles per hour, but that was necessary in order to accommodate those with smaller batteries, because if we had just ripped up and down the mountain, a majority of the riders would have run out of battery and be stranded with no cell service. I wasn't faced with that problem because I brought my Begode Master Pro, the biggest battery and the heaviest EUC in the world. Just because we were in the Los Angeles region doesn't mean there will be cell service. We were truly out there. If you were on this ride and didn't know how to ride seated, it was time to learn, or you would have regretted it. Most of the riders were seated just to minimize wind drag and to keep their battery states as high as possible. On my Master Pro, I sat down just for comfort. It's tough to keep your weight on your feet the entire time, moving at a speed in the low 20s for up to 10 hours or so. If you had less than a 3,600 watt-hour battery, you did not finish that ride. A couple of the riders with V13s had to call it quits because their battery state was too low. Almost all of the EUCs on this ride were Begodes. To estimate, about 20% were Master Pros, 60% EX30s and Commander Pros, and about 20% were Shermans and Shermanesses. There were even a couple of V13s on this ride, but they just didn't last because their batteries were too small. You really needed a wheel with more than 3,600 watt-hours. We took mountain roads. You really need a wheel with at least 3,600 watt-hours. We took mountain roads that were closed to cars, and so far from civilization that if someone had a medical emergency or an EUC that stopped working for some reason, help was probably a few hours away from arriving at a minimum. Not only was there no cell service, but there were also no charging opportunities, no food, and no water available. So everything needed to be carried on your own person in order to successfully finish the day. Stupidly, I only brought one large bottle of water. By mid-afternoon in the Southern California heat, I was feeling extremely dehydrated and regretted not being able to find more water. I'm sure there were some riders who also regretted not bringing an EUC that had larger batteries. This ride was made for the Master Pro. Long touring is what it was made to do. We rolled all the way down the mountain, averaging around 25 to 30 miles per hour. While heading down the mountain, we all got a ton of battery regen. If you go slow, you'll get the most regen on your battery. The V13 riders had to call for an Uber instead of ride the last 20 miles or so at one of our scheduled breaks because their wheels were completely empty. The EX30 and Commander Pro riders were all trying to keep it slow, but I had no such range anxiety. I rolled on ahead and went on at about 35 to 40 miles per hour and hit the acceleration as hard as I wanted, whenever I wanted, because, as I said before, Master Pro. Finally, we rolled through the city of Pasadena on our way back to the original meetup point. When we arrived, my wheel had 33% battery. but the more conservative riders had 50% left. Most EX30 and Commander Pro riders made it back with about 1% to 10% battery remaining. 92 miles on a 36 watt-hour 134 volt EUC is a pretty big feat. My Master Pro could have gone an additional 30 miles no problem without hitting low voltage tiltback. And that's coming from someone who tends to ride fairly inefficiently with lots of hard accelerations whenever possible. Pay absolutely zero attention to all those terrible people who are flagrantly violating traffic laws. I do not approve and refuse to say whether or not I was an active and willing participant in such vile disregard for the motor vehicle safety laws in California. Whew, what a long day. About 10 hours of riding. I'm so glad I did it, but I'm also so glad that this day was finished. After getting just a few hours of sleep, it was time to ride up to the top of another mountain. This ride was without a doubt the most challenging for me, and for pretty much everyone else too. Ever heard of Overheat Hill? Well, this is Overheat Mountain. We climbed thousands of vertical feet in about 9 miles, and numerous people told me to not take my Master Pro because of how technical numerous parts of this ride were. I didn't take their word for it and rode the Master P anyway. And I kinda regretted it too, I admit. They were right. I should have used a lighter, more nimble EUC, such as an Extreme, Commander Mini, or Patton to get to the top. I should have, really. There's just something rewarding about riding your own personal wheel and conquering the mountain that way, as opposed to using someone else's borrowed EUC, even if the borrowed wheel is better suited for the task. So many parts of this ride were very technical, especially for my 123-pound wheel. And it would have benefited me to have something a little bit less boat-like. A lot of the technical riding was not filmed because I needed both arms to help me keep my balance. And holding my Insta360 camera was just not an option when it got that tricky. Plus, if I dropped it and smashed it on a rock, then I'd be unable to continue filming this video for you. So, you're welcome, I guess. On this ride, just the easier parts were filmed. On one portion partway up the mountain, I lost my balance and my Master Pro's tire started spinning super fast right against my leg until it cut out at just over 70 miles per hour. It ended up ruining my least favorite pair of pants and roasted the skin underneath. It took about 3 weeks to recover from that injury. My wheel also got a bit of minor body damage during that little incident. It wasn't filmed. In the end, my Master Pro did get me to the top, but it wasn't easy. I was huffing and puffing in multiple spots, and I had to trolley and push it through certain spots, and I wasn't alone. There were portions where every rider had to dismount and trolley their wheel up the mountain. My Master Pro never exceeded 51 degrees Celsius, despite climbing such a long distance in such a short amount of time. Begode really dialed in this wheel as far as cooling is concerned. This is so much more vertical distance compared to Overheat Hill, and every EUC that was there was able to conquer it. Today's riders mostly consisted of Commander Minis, tons of Extremes, a couple Masters, only a few leaperkim wheels, one single V13, and a swath of Commander Pros and EX30s. The lunch spot at the observatory at the top of Mount Wilson, where most riders charged up their wheels. I found out later that Edwin Hubble used this observatory to prove that the universe is expanding, which was the basis for his famous Big Bang Theory. Yes, Edwin Hubble, the same Hubble that the famous telescope is named after. I wish I had known this when I rode past it. I feel like I missed a little piece of history right there, not knowing it as I rode past it. After lunch, we took some fire roads for about 5 to 10 miles and headed directly over to the top of Mount Disappointment, which was anything but. Seriously, check out that view. After this cool photo op, we headed back down the mountain. Most riders took a rather technical route down the mountain, but I didn't want to risk any further body damage on the heaviest EUC in the world. So I followed Marty down the mountain using the highway. I don't regret doing it either. I mean, the views were amazing. The roads were smooth, the traveling speed was fairly high, and the mountain views were beautiful. Today was divided up into 2 different rides. On both of these rides, I rode a borrowed Begode EX30, thanks to James at Next Gen Mobility, who I heartily recommend for purchasing your next EUC. The first ride was called Fullerton Loop, due to it being a trail ride all around the city of Fullerton, which was a fairly easy ride with only a few exceptions. It was largely bike and foot paths, so nothing too challenging. The biggest challenge on this ride were the occasional steep climbs up loose dirt, with someone in front of you going uphill at 2 miles per hour and you can't pass them. And as you know, with all EUCs, you have to keep moving in order to maintain your balance. Beyond that, this ride was pretty chill. There was no shortage of loose gravel, dirt, occasional steep climbs, and giant tree roots to jump over. This was the first time I'd gotten to ride this EUC, and at first I thought it was good, but not great, because I felt like I was constantly fighting it to accelerate. The entire first ride, I had a good time, but it wasn't as good of a time as it could have been, because at the time I was missing the secret sauce. Then I remembered that since this was a borrowed wheel, it was tuned to its owner rather than to me. I realized that the EX30 that I was on was set to hard mode, and I prefer to ride in soft mode. Once I switched riding mode to soft mode, this wheel's capabilities really opened up. When I told it to go, it said yes and then asked for more. After this lower speed ride, we charged our wheels up a little bit, stuffed our faces with sushi and Mongolian grill, then rode to Griffith Park. This is a location where the famous Hollywood sign is at. We rode a number of winding roads all throughout Hollywood as well, and rode past some of the most absurdly luxurious and expensive homes that one can imagine. It was awesome to see how the other side lives. Some of the homes here were truly amazing. The ride culminated in a climb to the top of the hill to take a photo in front of the Hollywood sign. And then once that was complete, we took dirt roads to make our way all the way up and behind the sign. It's not possible to actually go up and touch the Hollywood sign, since it's actively and heavily surveilled by the police to prevent vandalism. I'm not sure what somebody did, but at one point during this stop, someone in our giant group got yelled at by a cop on the PA system. This is as close as one can legally get to the Hollywood sign. It's not a view that many get to experience, and it was truly a special thing to take part in. We watched the sun set behind the mountains, waited for it to be completely dark, then rode back to the meetup spot well after it was pitch black. The majority of the group started the ride going through the Los Padres National Forest. The total distance of this ride was 75 miles. So for this ride, we skipped the first couple hours of riding in order to preserve our battery charge. We did this so we could properly push it and ride good and hard with no range anxiety. But first, we had to have some fun horsing around. We truly found the new must-have accessory of 2024, guaranteed to add 1 horsepower to your EUC. I rode with a small group of riders that call themselves the Horsemen, and it has nothing to do with this toy horse attachment, but it is fitting. The Horsemen graciously welcomed me into their group during my visit to Southern California. After playing around with this must-have EUC accessory, we all stayed behind the large group and then rode at high speed to catch up with them. Me, Justin, James, and Jabaric rode at about 45 miles per hour as a group to catch up with the large group. And dare I say, it was totally worth skipping the first third so we could ride as fast as we wanted. After all, that's where riding on the street is truly a joyful experience. No cars, smooth streets, epic vistas, and ripping along at whatever speed you want to ride at. The latter part of the ride was complete with a bit of horsing around, epic mountain views, numerous high-speed runs with mountains towering high up around you in all directions. Some parts of this ride had a Great Wall of China sort of vibes. Seeing the giant group go down the long fire roads where vehicles are rarely, if ever, seen, somehow reminded me of the song you're hearing.
Hurrah, hurrah, the ants go marching one by one, hurrah, hurrah, the ants go marching one by one, the little one stops to get some sun, and they all go marching down to the ground.
Okay, I won't subject you to the whole song. All I'm saying is that the EUC riders could be seen for up to a mile ahead of us, and it looked like little specks roving across the landscape. The grandeur of the remote parts of Los Angeles is stunningly beautiful. A vast majority of this ride was in excess of 40 miles per hour. It was particularly fun riding alongside and unsuccessfully trying to keep up with some of the fastest EUC racers in the world as they powered ahead. I have a pretty strong sense of self-preservation and bank account preservation, so I didn't want to push my wheel to its absolute limits. I'm a skilled rider, but I'm far from the most skilled, mostly because I'm a bit risk-averse. I have a wife, kids, and far too many animals at home that are waiting for me to return in one piece, so I didn't ride the beeps on my Master Pro. I thought exceeding 50 miles per hour on 60% battery might have been unwise. But I did ride at the highest speed I felt comfortable, and that was extremely satisfying. Riding alongside and mostly keeping up with some of the fastest racers in the world also felt very satisfying as well. Either way, it was an absolute blast, and I'm glad I had the opportunity. I ended up skipping the next day's ride in Mission Viejo because it was 2 hours drive away. From what I hear, this particular ride wasn't quite as good as the others anyway, so I wasn't missing too much. And we really needed to give our legs a day's break. This is a workout to ride this much every day. The following day, we rode up to Mount Baldy. This was without a doubt the best ride of the entire trip. What an unbelievable experience. We rode up to the Mount Baldy Lodge with an elevation of 4,000 feet. After taking the group photo, we raced ahead of everyone so we could have dibs on the chargers at the lunch stop. I can't come up with enough superlatives to describe the level of satisfaction I had when riding 35 miles per hour through the twisties, leaning hard against my wheel on this wide one-lane road. There was the occasional car going in the opposite direction, so we had to be careful about our surroundings still. Beyond that though, it was open road pulling lateral G-forces as much as we wanted. The owners of the Mount Baldy Lodge actually installed a ton of high current circuits just so we could charge up for this tour on the last day. Very generous of them. Riding as fast as you reasonably could in a group throughout the most picturesque mountain roads imaginable is something awesome to behold. Not that I had the ability to stop and enjoy the views, that is. I had places to go and lots of tight turns to make. We stopped for a wildly overpriced lunch at the Mount Baldy Lodge, charged up our wheels, and a raffle was held, with all the proceeds going to the American Childhood Cancer Association. After we got all fully charged up at high speed with our Roger chargers, we rode toward Cogswell Dam. This was truly an incredible ride. There is nothing quite like riding twisties on roads with virtually no risk of oncoming cars, so you can fly around corners at high speed. That's exactly what many of us did. We leaned deep into our turns and gently pushed the comfort level of some riders in order to help them improve their riding skill. Most of this ride was 25 to 40 miles per hour. Not exactly racing speed, but fast enough to still feel like you were riding on a roller coaster and enjoy the thrill of rolling through twisties. At the end of this incredible ride was the utterly spectacular Cogswell Dam. I think it would have been highly appropriate for someone to go down on this set of stairs and then do a torque test on their EUC, riding their wheel up the smooth portion. Maybe when 200-volt EUCs come along, we can convince a brave soul to give it a try, just to see if it can be done without overheating. Right at the end of the ride at Cogswell Dam, one rider ended up suffering a knee injury from a low-speed EUC crash at the very end, and wound up getting taken to the hospital. Almost as tragic was that the toy horse that we had also went missing. At least that mishap happened at the end of the tour, so the rider got to partake in virtually the entirety of the tour, and that was the only significant injury that happened during the entire time in the entire group. This ride was especially great because of all the people that showed up. It really was the who's who of EUCs. This Southern California EUC Tour further reinforced my love for the Begode Master Pro. It's not just extremely reliable and safe, but also comfortable, powerful, and surprisingly capable, even off-road with my Michelin street tire. There is no other EUC I would have rather ridden on those winding, twisting roads out in the mountains. The Master Pro has proven itself over and over again, and safely got me where I wanted to go while putting it through its paces on some of the most challenging terrain, some of which I still don't recommend for the Master Pro. It seemed most people in this very large group also chose Begode and Extreme Bull as their primary choice of the EUC brand. It would be fair to say that about 80+% of the EUCs that were seen on this tour were from either of those companies, and for good reason. Despite reliability issues in the past, their build quality is now very high, now boasting a very high reliability factor, tons of power to spare, and, most importantly, a high value factor. That checks all the important boxes for me. Begode and Extreme Bull showcased their abilities for both street riding and challenging off-road trail rides with ease, and not a single person had overheating issues with their EUCs during this entire tour, an issue that was prevalent in the past with older EUCs on the long, steep uphill climbs. In 2023, that's now a thing of the past. The EUC community in Southern California is vibrant and still growing rapidly. I just don't have that where I live in North Carolina. I am the EUC community here, and it can be lonely and sometimes boring being a solo rider almost all the time. That is the one thing that made this trip so incredibly special though, and a truly once-in-a-lifetime experience. If you ride an EUC and don't know the person next to you who also rides, you have this intangible and invisible connection to that other person because you have that common ground. It doesn't matter what brand you ride, because the best EUC is the one that you are on, the one that you're most comfortable with, and the one that you love. Ride the wheel that fits your needs best, and don't let anyone, myself included, convince you otherwise. You know yourself best, along with your needs, use cases, and desires. Despite this tour having mostly Begode and Extreme Bull riders, get the EUC that will serve your needs best, and tell the rest of the naysayers to kick rocks. If you're in the market for a new EUC, check out the video description, which has tons of discount codes and affiliate links that directly support the channel. This video was only made possible thanks to my favorite EUC vendor, Next Gen Mobility. Check them out at nextgenmobility.org and tell them I sent you. Also super duper important is that you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Do it because it really helps my self-esteem. The Southern California EUC Tour was truly an experience to remember. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.